Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on YouTube too, youtube.com/@theteam980. Our pleasure to welcome back to the show Madeline Coleman, covers Formula One for The Athletic. Madeline, 2 times in 2 weeks. A lot going on in your world.
I know, it's a busy part of the season, but I'm happy to be back. Nice to see you, Craig.
Thank you. You as well. So, the big news, it kind of was weird because it felt like I was in an episode of Drive to Survive this morning. Like, they had the little tweet sound effect that goes off in the show, and everyone's like, oh, my God. And this morning, the big news, Daniel Ricciardo is back in. He has a seat. One of the most popular drivers on the planet. Certainly, someone who's very well known from Drive to Survive for those that have become fans of the sport through that show. But he goes to Alpha Tauri. Nick DeVries out. How rare is this to happen in the middle of a season?
So it's been a few years since we've actually seen it. The most recent one that I can recall off the top of my head was Alex Albon replacing Pierre Gasly at Red Bull, actually, back in, I believe, 2019 was halfway point of the season before, I think it was for the Belgian Grand Prix, oddly enough, since that race is in 2 weeks.
Yep. Yeah, so hasn't happened very often. And this one's kind of a unique one because the relationship between Red Bull and Alpha Tauri. Can you kind of explain that relationship and how that potentially impacted Ricciardo's ability to be the next man up for this seat?
Yeah, so the relationship between AlphaTauri and Red Bull is an interesting one. They're both owned by Red Bull, the energy drink company. So in a way, AlphaTauri is it's been best described as a sister team almost. They're both their own separate teams. They have their own separate drivers, but a lot of times you'll see Red Bull juniors come through the works. And so like Alex Albon and Pierre Gasly, they were both part of the Red Bull kind of family. And so you'll see them typically go AlphaTauri, it used to be known as Toro Rosso before that, and then go up to Red Bull. And so I think part of being back in the Red Bull family and Red Bull being able to see, how Daniel was doing, how he was able to progress from his days at McLaren to now where he is today, that probably did help to some extent.
Yeah, so he's kind of under this wing. And is it something that, does AlphaTauri make this decision? Does Red Bull make this decision? Who's saying, hey, Nick DeVries, you got to go, and it's Ricciardo that's in? Or is it some collaboration between the two teams?
I think it's a little bit of a collaboration, but then also it comes down to, Christian Horner and Helmut Marko. Helmut's been pretty vocal within recent weeks about what they felt and what they thought about Nick DeVries' performance, and even about how Christian Horner wasn't a fan. Helmut Marko was. Franz Tost wanted. Mick Schumacher, I believe, was his pick for who he had his eye on for the seat. And so it's kind of a little bit more of a little bit of a collaboration, because it is at the end of the day 2 separate teams, even though they are owned by the same parent company.
Madeline Coleman covers Formula One for The Athletic, helps write their newsletter, The Pit Lane, which you can get to your inbox multiple times a week. Here for Not My Beat again today on The Hoffman Show. So there's also kind of this parallel narrative / parallel reality about Sergio Perez, the other driver at Red Bull. Max Verstappen is dominating Formula One. Look, Lewis Hamilton won, 7 straight? And nothing that Lewis did was touching what Max has done right now. I actually saw a stat the other day. It might have been in y'all's newsletter that he could not win a race for the rest of the season. If he just finishes second for the rest of the season, he still wins the Drivers' Championship. And he, I think, has enough points that he would also be in first place or top 3 in the constructors on his own. It's insane what Verstappen is doing. So obviously the car is tremendous. The other driver, though, Sergio Perez at Red Bull, is struggling a bit, has really struggled specifically in qualifying, even if he's made up some places in races. How much does Checo's struggles impact the desire to potentially get Ricciardo in a car and see what he could potentially do to potentially even replace Checo next year?
I think it'd be a wait-and-see type scenario. I remember seeing somewhere on Twitter today that a few sources were telling other F1 journalists that, his time today at Silverstone, they were doing the tire testing for next year, and he was in the RB19, that the time was pretty eye-catching. So I think Sergio's seat, there's going to be more pressure. However, Christian Horner's been pretty vocal and supportive about Sergio up until this point. So it's a little bit more wait-and-see, but the pressure's definitely there. But Sergio is under contract until 2024.
Are those are Formula One contracts hard and fast? I mean, obviously Nick DeVries was under contract, so I guess there are outs. But how rare is it? How possible is it for them, if Sergio were to continue to struggle, to be like, no, we're going to make a change before your contract is up? I guess they just pay him.
Basically a buyout. So McLaren and Daniel Ricciardo, that's a good example of that. There was a buyout involved there, and he got paid millions of dollars to basically end his contract early because he was supposed to be still in the McLaren seat this season. And so there's always typically outs. Sometimes they'll be a little bit tighter than others, but without knowing what Sergio's contract is, there's always some type of wiggle room. It just kind of boils down to what both sides want, what's the best case scenario.
Yeah, there's definitely plenty of money to do the buyout. That is the nature of the sport. Again, Madeline Coleman with us, covers F1 for The Athletic. So what is reasonable to expect from Ricciardo? Like, his form apparently was great in this tire test, but he hasn't driven in a long time. At McLaren, he really struggled. He's driving a not very good car. What's reasonable to expect from Daniel Ricciardo?
That's definitely putting it nicely. The Alpha Tauri car is not great. That's not a secret. Even Franz came out saying that he basically didn't trust his engineers earlier this season. That's
good for morale.
Yeah, that's just how bad it was. Granted, that came several rounds ago, so it's been a couple months. But, at best, he'll be scoring points. We've seen that Yuki's pretty close to it, that he gets, close to the cusp of, P11, or he'll get up into the points with P10. So, at best, he'll be scoring points, but at least he can prove himself, and it's a lot better than him being on the sidelines. So there's a big difference between the AlphaTauri car versus the RB19, but knowing that he still has the ability to drive the F1 car and is still doing well, that's at least a reason for hope.
For sure. As far as kind of what this means around Formula One, I'm sure the producers of Drive to Survive are psyched. But what has been the reaction around the F1 world this morning? Other drivers, journalists, what's been the reaction to Daniel Ricciardo's return?
As far as journalists go, I think it's a little bit of a surprise. He's always great. He's always been very kind from my interactions with him. But to see Nick out after 10 races when we've got a very long schedule to go, this is going to go all the way, the season goes until Thanksgiving. So we've got quite a bit chunk of the season left, and summer break is still 2 races away. So for Nick to already be out during his first season, that was a little bit of a surprise, at least to me and some other people that I've been talking to, because at least you would think the switch might come during summer break if it did become kind of like a panic button type scenario where we absolutely need to switch them out. Because at the end of the day, this was still Nick's rookie season. Yes, he came in as a champion and from other series and everything, but there's still a learning curve that needs to be considered here.
Yeah, and if you want more on De Vries, I know, Madeline, you wrote about him, so you can read that at The Athletic. Wrapping up here with Madeline Coleman again from The Athletic with us, talking a little F1. The big news today, Daniel Ricciardo back in a seat for AlphaTauri. We talked about this a little bit, but how does this affect the driver lineup for next year? How many seats are open? Obviously, De Vries now available. Ricciardo's going to have a half a season under his belt. What do you think this means moving forward?
He was a big domino to fall, to be honest. That was a pretty big move to happen, and much earlier than I think anyone was really expecting, especially in the context of silly season, because that was chaotic last year, and it'll probably be a little bit more chaotic, more so this year and next year. The question mark basically is whether he stays on, or if Sergio's struggles continue, is he going to go in and fill in that Red Bull seat? Is he going to end up leaving, the Red Bull family again like he did within the last few years? I think it's probably going to be more of maybe a next season thing, but it also depends with how long this season is. Could we have another scenario there?
Yeah, I wonder if his agent was already having conversations with people and how that changes now that he'll have actual race results. Then there's this fun hypothetical to kick around, Madeline, which is, what if he never leaves in the first place? Because in 2019, he has a pretty good year with Red Bull. I think that's the year he wins in Monaco. But it's pretty clear, Max is coming. He's going to be the number one guy. Daniel wants to go somewhere else. He goes to Renault. That turns into a disaster because it just doesn't go as well. And then he leaves when they finally start to catch their stride towards the end of the year. He goes to McLaren. That absolutely bombs. But if he just kind of does the safe thing, doesn't take the leap, and that's kind of a famous moment in Drive to Survive, the way they chronicled it. They overlay, for those that haven't seen the show, he's talking about his decision to leave. They overlay it with him literally jumping off a cliff into the ocean and taking the leap. So it's beautiful cinematography. Good job, Netflix. If he never takes that leap, though, what are we talking about today? Like, is he someone who's been Max's teammate, winning races every once in a while the last couple of years? Does he have bad couple of years anyway? Like, what's your best guess?
My best guess is that he probably would have been winning every so often. I think there's no denying how strong Max is. He's an incredibly talented driver. He's only continued to grow. And it makes sense him being Red Bull's number one, regardless of who the teammate is. And that's no knock to Daniel's talent, because he is a strong driver at the end of the day. My personal opinion, I feel that he shouldn't have left Red Bull. Granted, I understand taking the bet on yourself and wanting to try to figure out what would be the best option. Sometimes you need to leave to realize how good of an opportunity that you have. But then you also have like the case of Pierre Gasly taking the bet on himself, leaving the Red Bull family for the first time, and what he's doing over at Alpine. Granted, Alpine's having their own struggles and everything, but I think in an alternate world, then he would have been winning every so often. I think he would have continued to excel because, as you said, it's not like he was doing poorly at Red Bull. It's just a matter of that he had this young talent coming up that looked destined to be number one.
Yeah. You mentioned Gasly, and I just got mad again on his behalf for Stroll hitting him this weekend. Madeline Coleman with us talking F1. You can read her work in The Athletic. Her and her colleagues doing a great job covering all angles of this news. Madeline, thanks so much for doing this, and I'm sure we'll be talking again as silly season continues these next couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Craig.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.